Hello and welcome to SustainaPod, a youth-led podcast for the youth and anyone passionate about sustainability across the world. My name is Chinny. I'm the head of podcast content development and the host of today's episode in the Green Career series. Today, I'm so lucky to be joined by Colleen Chan, a development chemist with an extensive background into fields into the research of sustainable solutions to tackle global issues such as climate change and air pollution. After completing her bachelor's and master of philosophy degrees in Hong Kong, she completed her PhD at ETH Zurich and was a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Oxford. Thank you so much for being here, Colleen.
Thank you.
As a process development chemist at Johnson Matthey, she worked on upscaling new emission control catalyst products, which are commonly used in cars. And in the near future, she is planning to devote her career to sustainable development by contributing her expertise in chemistry to develop technologies that can enable the transition to net zero, which, according to the United Nations, signifies cutting greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible. So on to general questions. The first question is, what prompted you to enter into a career of chemistry research? Did sustainability play a role in choosing your specific career path, or was there another incentive?
So I think, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. And about my career, I think the first time that I encountered research in chemistry is while I was doing my bachelor degree and a semester project. And that was the first time I worked in a research group under supervision of a professor at the university. And since then, I realized how interesting research it is. It's basically being able to solve a big question that no one yet know how to solve it yet. And you'll be the one that's going to discover something, to learn something new, and to be able to solve the problem. And I think that's what fascinated me most about during research. At the same time, when I was studying chemistry, I get a more in-depth knowledge of how chemistry is affecting different areas in our day-to-day life. For example, how important it is in pharmaceutical industry, petrochemical industry, and I see how much chemistry can contribute in those areas. And I also see research and development to be a fundamental in those industries to have new products, new technologies. And that's why I decided to devote my career in the research and development using my chemistry knowledge. And back to the question whether sustainability play a role, I think back then was less discussed sustainability compared to recent years. But I do think because of the importance it is of chemistry, chemical industry, definitely it is going to play a very important role when we have to transit to a more sustainable future. That was my initial major. And there was no specific one more focus during my bachelor studies. It's very well balanced syllabus with chemistry courses can be roughly divided into 3 different types, from organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, and physical chemistry. And only after I started my master degree, start working in the field of research, I get to have a bit more of a focused research theme, which is organometallic chemistry and catalysis. This is much more related to the application of organometallic chemistry in day-to-day basis in different areas and industry. So basically, organometallic chemistry is a combination of both organic and inorganic chemistry.
Yeah, that's great. I totally know what that means, but it sounds very interesting. So what do you think was the most important thing that you learned during your education that affects your job today? Was it the organic metallic chemistry that you mentioned, or maybe did you learn something else during your career that is playing more of a major role in it?
I think there are lots of things definitely that I have learned are very important in my today's career, which includes my knowledge in chemistry, my skills in doing experiments, as well as how I analyze data, how I draw conclusions. I think all of these are really important because it basically teaches me how to solve any different kinds of problems too. But if I have to talk about maybe one thing, is that I would say communication skill that I get trained during my education is really important and affecting me most today, that I use it basically every day. During my education, I have the chance to be able to collaborate with a lot of experts and international researchers from different institute or university. So I get to work with them, and I learned how to communicate my project, my progress or my results to them based on their background, as well as I got lots of opportunity to present at conferences, in meetings, and this allowed me also to learn how to build up a good story, how to make a clear presentation. And I think that's really important because no matter what I am working on today, I believe you often got the opportunity to present something, including your work. And I think that's really important skill to have. To be able to communicate effectively to a broad range of audience and to deliver your message.
That's great. I love that you mentioned communication, because I think it's definitely super important in so many jobs. Like, it's so important to be able to communicate with like so many different people. And then also just kind of using your research and establishing a clear and good story and when presenting is also super important. So I think that, yeah, that's definitely really, really good. So if you could tell me one challenge and one highlight of entering this field of chemistry research or your career so far, what would they be?
I think one challenge is that I can imagine for many people that who might be interested in the field is that how do then they find out what they really interested in or passionate about? Because in research, there are so many small different type of research topics. And I think it's very important to find one that you are really interested in, because then this gives you the motivation to be able to overcome different challenges during your research career. And I think it might not be very easy before you start working in the field. So I would say maybe one way to really know what you are interested in is that, of course, you have to do a lot of research beforehand to know which area, which focus you would like to proceed. But at the same time, maybe take the opportunity to really do internship or a semester project. And this allows you to work in a research group to get a first experience working in research and development. And I think that's really important. Back then, it's helped me also a lot in choosing the field that I'm interested in today. I'm very happy that and very glad that being able to work in this career, what I'm really passionate about, and get the opportunity to collaborate with experts from different fields and being able to learn from them. And I think that's really important for me, and that's really drive me to further improve myself and develop myself in the career. So I really enjoyed all this unique opportunity being able to collaborate with different people. And I think one of the big steps that I have in my career is to decide to do my doctoral degree. And during that time, similarly, I got lots of collaboration opportunity. And based on this collaboration during my PhD, we were able to develop a new way to improve a chemical reaction that is currently being used in petrochemical industry. So we have developed a very special and tailored chemical. By adding this to the reaction that we are focused in, then we were able to reduce significantly its operating temperature, which is a great improvement in terms of the processes. So I'm very happy that I was able to work with all these talent and being able to contribute in such an important project during my PhD.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like such what a breakthrough. Like, I think working with other people to achieve like a shared vision is definitely really good. Yeah. So would you have any advice you'd like to give to those who'd like to enter the field of chemistry research?
I think before you enter the field, you have to be very clear that you definitely is passionate about chemistry and research. You have to be determined to do research so as to overcome challenges. So I think this is very important to have a clear mind before you decided to enter. And after you have entered the field of research, I think there are two things that's very important to keep in mind. One is the big picture, and the other part is small details. So big picture is referring to what type of big question you are solving, trying with your research. So this keeps your research being relevant, being important and impactful. And I think that's really important. You shouldn't forget how important and what the goal of your research. And second, down to small details is that not only focusing on the big thing, but you have to come down to your day-to-day work. You have to make sure that what you do is as careful as possible, how you plan your experiment, analyze data, or draw conclusion. All these small steps contribute to a very solid ground of scientific research. So I think this is also very important. So I think these two things that you have to keep in mind, both something big and something small down to details, are very important.
I think that is really, really good, especially like, because I think it's really easy for a lot of people to just kind of say like, oh, I want to do it. I want to do this, like, but they don't realize like if it's relevant, if they're actually passionate about it. Because I think, especially at my age, it's kind of difficult to know whether you actually want to do something or whether you like the idea of doing it more. So I think that's really important. Like what you said is definitely super, super applicable to a lot of people. So we're going to move on to more chemistry specific questions now. So is the field of chemistry more theoretical, or is there more like hands-on work, especially when it comes to research?
I think it's involved, most of the research topic involve a lot of experimental work, and many of them are very hands-on, meaning that you have to work in the laboratory, working with chemicals, and that's also what I do. So you have to do a lot of experiments, trials to synthesize something, to do some reactions. And there's also another area in chemistry where I'm more theoretically focused. So you got more desktop work where you work on your computer, for example, trying to calculate something, developing some models. But I think many of those cases, you will still need to verify what you have developed, for example, a model. So many of them also collaborate a lot with experimentalists to verify what they have developed. So again, I think in both cases, it requires lots of hands-on and doing experimental work.
That sounds good. That sounds good. And I like that there are two different areas. So I think that's good. So as mentioned previously, you worked at Johnson Matthey for a while. So could you explain a little bit more about your process development work, about emission control catalysts?
Yeah, definitely. So I was a process development chemist at Johnson Matthey, and I work on emission control catalysts. These are catalysts that are being used in cars. So basically they act as a filter that helps to filter out harmful substances, harmful chemical from the exhaust of cars. And that is now being incorporated into almost every cars that you can see on the road nowadays. And if you think about it, 50, 60 years ago of the looking at back then, those cars, probably what they are coming out from their exhaust is something black polluted gases. And based on the development of this emission control catalyst, that's how we have such a clean air that we are still breathing now today. And I think that is a really important development at that company. So as a process development chemist there, our key role is to bring newly developed product to manufacturing scale. So we have to ensure that this newly discovered product can be manufactured in a much bigger scale in a manufacturing site, in an industrial factory setting. So when you develop new product, you may make a couple of them as a prototype. And the method that you make them, the way that you made this product can be very different if you have to produce 100,000 of these pieces. And so we need a lot of optimization of how we are going to make them, making sure that they have the ideal property that we want when we are doing big scale production. So this is what we do. We do a lot of optimization of the recipe, making them. So we have to sometimes optimize it according to some specific requirement of the factory. What type of raw material do they have? What type of equipment do they have? So we do a lot of optimization work. and we have to validate what we have optimized. So we do some trials, making sure that it works before it's going to a real production. So that's basically the key role of our job as a process development chemist.
I think the work sounds super important, as I said like multiple times throughout all this, but I like how it's really important. You have to validate, I think you said, your optimizations before you bring the products to like a factory scale, because I think if you're going to release something to so many different people, it's really important that it's safe and then it's valid. So I agree with that. How do you think legislation, so like law, policy making on air pollution, can drive the development of like new products like what you just mentioned?
So that's actually a very interesting question, because I think maybe not very trivial to many people how this legislation do drive the development down to a R&D level. But in this area, legislation is basically the key driving force. So each year, different countries are tightening their legislation. So they are aiming to have a lower and lower level of pollutants allowed to be emitted from the car exhaust. So this is why we need to have better products, have improved products to be able to meet those aims. And if you think about it, the car manufacturer is already selling their car, which works well, which customer buy. And if there's no tightening of legislation, there will be only little initiative to further improve them. And so I think it is a really important driving force for developing improved technology.
Yeah, I think that's also really relevant now because like global kind of policies and legislations are changing so much, especially now that the world is more focused on like climate change and also like climate action. So I think that's super important. And I think what you said really like relates to this. So as you mentioned to me before, you're planning to take the next step in your career. So could you tell me a bit more about your plans and how you can continue to contribute your knowledge in chemistry in the realm of sustainability?
Yeah, so I think in my career, I have always been thinking how I can better utilize my knowledge, how I can contribute a bit more to make positive impact to the world, to the society. And if we think about one very important problem that we have nowadays is climate change, as you have mentioned. So it's really a key that we have to solve this problem. And many countries have said that they want to transition to net zero. They want to have a more sustainable future. And I do believe chemistry can do a lot in those areas. And that's also what I would like to focus in the future to tackle this global problem and contribute my expertise. So one area that is very interesting is CO2 capture, meaning that we capture the carbon dioxide instead of releasing it to the atmosphere, which leads to global warming. So for example, nowadays, we still rely a lot on fossil fuels. So when we transform fossil fuels into energy in this chemical process, we are producing a lot of CO2. And what some company is already doing is that they capture the CO2 chemically and store them somewhere else instead of releasing it to the environment. So this is one way to help to avoid emission of greenhouse gases to the environment and leading to a net zero emission. But we also have to deal with those CO2 that is already in the environment. And I think one area which is very new, very exciting, it's direct air capture. So we directly want to capture the CO2 that is already in the atmosphere chemically, and then to store them underground. So store them permanently somewhere else. And so I think this area is having a lot of rapid development and also very exciting, because this is the only way that we can take out something that we have already emitted historically into the atmosphere. So I think this is the area where I would really like to work on in the future, contributing myself and carbon capture and to enable a more sustainable future.
I think that's really like such an important area, and it's so like germane. And I think the idea is like really, really genius. It's a really like smart idea. And also because a lot of people are like, oh, what can we do to prevent this? Or what can we do to prevent that? But then the thing is, like, there's already a problem. And then what this technology is doing is kind of like taking back that problem instead of trying to prevent it, which I think is equally as important as preventing it, but it's also having a huge impact because you're taking something and then storing it underground and, making the air a bit cleaner. And so CO2 capture, this technology is actually still in the early stages of development, but there are actually around 20 plants operating in the world. So do you think the growing interest in this area of CO2 capture will be able to initiate like further development or further research in this area?
Yeah, so nowadays there is around 20 plants, to be precise, it's 18 plants, and there are some plants that are still building. And I think the raising interest is so important actually to this area because this is a very new technology and it requires lots of capital to further develop. It requires funding to do further research and development in this area. So the raising interest is definitely a very important driving force. And I know that now already there are some big companies like Microsoft, they are investing, they are willing to fund this area of development. So it's a really important area. And I think, and only by people do care about climate change, do care about direct air capture, this is the only way that can allow this to be further developed. It has a very great potential in the future, but it's very new, very cutting edge. And that's why we need more support to be able to develop this type of technologies.
I definitely think like you said big companies are funding this, like Microsoft, and I think that's a really big step for a lot of companies to take to like fund projects that have so much potential like this. So I think that's a really, really good end because that was actually the last question. But as a bonus question, what do you think the listener should take away from our conversation today? What has been the main message or main point that you're trying to get across?
So I think sustainability is very important. And I think the audience of this podcast are those who care about sustainability. And I think that it's really important to think yourself what you can do, even at a personal level, to contribute to a more sustainable future. And I do think that we need to have big technology development. We need to change something very general, very big that what we are currently doing today, like energy transition, right? But down to a personal level, what you can do to actually, for example, use a bit less energy, a bit less non-carbon neutral energy, and all this come down to personal choice. And I believe there are small areas that each individual can do something. And I think that's really important is that you have that awareness in mind, you know how important, how serious the problem of climate change is, and you are willing to do something and act on it. I think that's the most important message.
Thank you for that. So first off, thank you to Kawing for sharing all of your insights with us today. I've learned so much, and I'm sure the listeners have too. Thank you to the SustainaPod listeners for tuning in this week with us. We would love to hear from you about the episode, so let us know your questions and comments by messaging us on Instagram at sustainapod_GIH or email us at sustainapod@gmail.com. Thank you. Bye.